Welcome to the spring edition of the interactive tour of the Habitat Conservation Area. This time of year is one of my favorites as it is a time of awakening and a time of change. As the weather transitions from winter to spring, there's lots going on at Wascana Lake. This includes plants beginning to flower, animals beginning to change color, and reptiles coming out of hibernation. Spring is a wonderful time to go for a walk around the Habitat Conservation Area. One of the best ways to know that it's spring at Wascana Lake is by looking at the plants. One of the best ways to tell that plants are turning to spring is by new buds forming on trees, such as these, and by flowers beginning to bloom. Another way to identify that spring is near at Wascana Park is by looking at the animals around the park. One of the most common animals is rabbits, whose fur will change from white to brown as the seasons change from winter to spring. This is due to the longer days and the warmer temperatures that spring brings. Another exciting sign of spring is the emergence of reptiles such as the western painted turtle out of Wascana Lake. Throughout the winter it hibernates under the water, and as the temperature increases it can sense this change and begin to wake up and come to shore. Behind me is a dugout where you will find upwards to 30 turtles throughout the summer. Like I said in the beginning, spring is a very exciting time at Wascana Lake. So come with me on a tour of the Habitat Conservation Area to see what's changing from the winter to the spring. Today we are going to talk to you about the importance of soil and how vital it is to the spring success of plants and animals. One of the most common signs of spring is the return of the greenery. This takes place at a much deeper level than trees and occurs in the soil. Soil is one of the most important renewable resources in Wascana Park and is the home to many different insects and of course seeds. The makeup of soil does not change in the spring, but the increased rainfall and winter runoff will change the environment around the soil. This means that plants will start to grow in the spring and it will use that excess water to flourish into the summer. While the water in the spring helps plants grow, too much water could actually hurt the soil. If there's too much rainfall in the spring or too much runoff in the winter, the topsoil on the shorelines can actually run into the water, further eroding the shorelines. Without the topsoil in the ground, it makes it difficult for plants to grow as they can't stabilize into the soil. Now let's talk about soil, shall we? Soil is one of the oldest and most important natural resources to life on Earth. The formation of soil started over 400 million years ago through the breakdown of rock and organic material. All soil is made out of 5 different ingredients: minerals, organic matter, gas, water, and living organisms. The soil can differ based on where you are on Earth. The soil around Wascana is really high in clay, so it's ideal for harvesting grains. When you look at soil, you might notice different colors or textures to the soil. This is because there are 5 different layers of soil. The top layer is called the organic layer, and this is made up of mostly dead plants, dead leaves, and lots of different sticks and roots. Under the organic layer is the topsoil, and this is the layer that plants love. It is nutrient rich with lots of decomposers and insects that will turn the organic material into nutrients that the plants can absorb. The layer below the topsoil is called the subsoil, and this layer is made up of small soil particles with a very small amount of organic matter. The next layer is called the parent material, which is made up of very small, compact soil that is mixed with small pieces of rock. At this depth, there is no organic material left in the soil. The deepest layer of the soil is called the bedrock, which is composed of a deposit of solid rock. The soil is home to billions of different organisms, ranging from microscopic organisms all the way to large animals such as gophers and rabbits. If you go out and dig in the soil, odds are you will find an earthworm. Did you know that earthworms are almost 200 million years old and they can be traced back to the dinosaurs? If you're out on a rainy day, be sure to check the soil, as this is prime time to find different kinds of earthworms. It's also a great time to look at the texture of the soil, and maybe you can identify all 5 layers of soil. Now that we've talked about the soil layer, what grows in soil? Well, it's plants. In the winter, plants will go into energy saver mode. This means that they will use as little energy as possible throughout the winter to ensure their survival. In the spring, in the genetic code of the plants, it'll start to realize that it's getting warmer outside and that it's getting more rain. So with more rain, it will open up its roots and intake more nutrients so it can start growing. And this can be seen as buds will start to grow with the plant. Just like humans, plants need food to survive. Plants get their food through a process known as photosynthesis, where it will take sunlight and nutrients and turn it into a food that it can eat. This means that the plant will continue to grow and continue to make itself stronger throughout the spring and into the summer months. As spring turns into summer, the appearance of the plants will change. For trees, they will begin to bud, and by the middle part of summer, the trees will be full of leaves. For flowers, they will start to bloom and turn into different colors like pink, purple, or red. Go for a walk through Wascana Park in the spring and summer, and you will be able to see the changes happening in these plants. Plants come in many different shapes, sizes, and colors, but for the most part, they'll all share a similar structure. Most plants have roots, which is essential for nutrient uptake and water uptake. The next part up is the stem. The stem is meant to transport the nutrients in the water from the bottom of the plant to the top of the plant, and it's also meant to keep the structure stable. Once we get to the top of the plant, that's usually where the flowers are. This is the most important part of a plant. The flowers are vital for reproduction, and this is where the male and female reproductive cells are. Pollinators will come visit the flowers, and they will bring the pollen from one plant to the stigma of the next plant, which will help create a new flower. So most plants in Wascana Park are deciduous plants, which means that they can be either male or female. There's an easy way to tell the difference between the two. A male plant, if it has flowers, will create pollen. This pollen is then used in a female flower to create a berry. So male trees will have flowers and pollen, but female trees will have flowers that turn to berries. These berries, once they get dry and shrivel up, will fall to the ground and might possibly create a new tree. In some cases, a flower will have both male and female parts. The male part of a flower is called the anther, which is where the pollen is produced. The female part of the flower is called the stigma, which contains the ovaries. If pollen from the anther becomes in contact with the ovaries, it will create a seed that can grow a new flower. Now that you know the structure of the plant, you might be asking, how does pollen get from one plant to another plant? Well, that is from the help of pollinators such as honeybees, birds, and even bats. We will learn about that in the next section. As you've been walking around the habitat conservation area, I'm sure you've seen plenty of different flowers and plants. But did you know that flowers and plants have a way of communicating with different insects and birds? They use their smell as well as colors that we can't even see to communicate to attract pollinators. Pollinators can come in many different shapes and sizes. They can be as small as insects, but as big as birds and bats. Pollinators are vital to the success of a flowering plant, as 85% of all flowering plants need pollinators to reproduce. The purpose of pollinators is to gather pollen from one plant, usually the male, and bring it over to the female plant called the stigma. Once the pollen has reached the stigma, it will create a seed that a new flower can grow from. Pollinators are vital for plant reproduction, but it's also vital to the success of an ecosystem. The success of pollinators stretches much further than that, as 1 out of every 3 bites of food that you eat exists solely because of pollinators. This includes different kinds of butters, plants, vegetables, and fruit. Cross-pollination is another key function of pollinators. This is when a pollinator takes the pollen from one plant and brings it to another plant of a different variety. This can happen inside of a species or between 2 different species. An example of this is if you had a red rose and a white rose. If pollen was taken from the red rose and brought to the white rose, it would create a seed that has both parental information in it. This seed might make a pink rose. The importance of pollinators to a healthy ecosystem is undeniable, but pollinators are disappearing at an alarming rate. The main threats facing pollinators are pesticide use, habitat loss, habitat degradation, and fragmentation. Pesticide use has a devastating effect on pollinators, as many of the popular pesticides used for grass and garden products is toxic to bees and other pollinators. An example of this is if you sprayed a flower with a pesticide in the afternoon and a bee arrives to transport pollen, there is a good chance that the pesticide will kill the bee or permanently injure it. One of the driving forces in pollinator habitat loss is the need for new agricultural land or the expansion of construction or new areas around the city. Habitat degradation, also known as the decline in habitat quality, can be seen with the introduction of pollution into an area that slowly breaks down or destroys a habitat. Finally, habitat fragmentation is the separation of a larger habitat into smaller habitats that are different and isolated from each other. An example of this is if you build roadways through a habitat, it can cut up the habitat into different fragments. While there are many efforts being made to help protect pollinators, one way that you can help is by planting a native pollinator garden. By planting a native pollinator garden, it will be beneficial for both you and the pollinators. Native pollinator gardens are generally low maintenance as they thrive in their ecosystem, and pollinators will not have to worry about pesticides. While you are learning about pollinators, we have a fun game for you to play called the Crab Spider game, which highlights the predator-prey dynamic of pollinators. This game is best played with a large group of people, as it can show the dynamics between predator and prey. For more information on this game, check out the activity guide. Wascana Marsh is always an exciting place to visit in the spring, as it falls along one of the migratory paths of popular migratory birds. Whether they're staying for a day, a month, or for the summer months, Wascana Park's always an exciting place to come check out migratory species. A migratory bird is defined as a bird that travels from one place to another, often covering a lot of distance. Regina is the home of the Wascana Wetland Bird Sanctuary, and is home to up to 115 species of birds that will visit throughout the year. Often they can travel from as far south as Mexico or Central America up here for breeding, but they might just be traveling further north. The migratory birds that visit Wascana throughout the year can be split into two categories. They can either be wetland birds or grassland birds, both of which can be found in the Habitat Conservation Area. Next, I'm going to go over a couple different migratory birds that will call Wascana home throughout the year.
One of the most frequent wetland visitors to Wascana Lake are the mallard ducks. Mallards are large ducks with large bodies, round heads, and flat bills. Male mallards have a dark green head, while the females and juveniles are brown with orange beaks. During most of the year, they will reside in the Midwestern United States and may move further south during the wintering, often as far south as Alabama or even Mexico. In the spring, many mallard ducks will enter Canada for breeding. Mallard ducks can fly up to 110 kilometers per hour and can take off in a vertical direction from the water if needed. Lesser yellowlegs are a migratory marsh piper that reside in shallow wetlands across North America. They are identified by their bright yellow legs and thin bill. Lesser yellowlegs spend their non-breeding time in the southern United States and can go as far south as Central America. They travel a very long distance during migration, as they make their way as far north as Yukon and the Northwest Territories for breeding. If you see a lesser yellowlegs at Wascana, odds are it's just stopping for a short amount of time before it continues its journey north. The young lesser yellowlegs are precocial, meaning they are hatched in an advanced state and can start walking and feeding itself immediately. An example of a grassland or forest migratory bird would be the bobolink. Bobolinks are small birds that are often seen perched on a grass stem. Male bobolinks are identified by their white back and black body, along with a yellow patch on the back of their heads. Female bobolinks have yellow bodies with brown backs. Bobolinks are known as a long-distance migrant and travel over 20,000 kilometers during a year. Bobolinks are known to breed in the grasslands around Wascana Lake, but when they are not breeding, they can travel as far south as South America. An interesting fact about bobolinks is that they can orientate themselves with the Earth's magnetic fields, using the iron oxide in its nose and in the tissues around their olfactory bulb in its brain. Another grassland migratory bird is the cedar waxwing. The cedar waxwing is one of the most popular birds to look for at the Habitat Conservation Area at Wascana Lake. The adults have a smooth, multicolored appearance with brown heads and backs with yellow bodies. One of the best ways to identify a cedar waxwing is by looking for a single red droplet on their wings. The purpose of this red droplet is unknown, but it may be to attract a partner. The cedar waxwing has a unique migratory pattern, as they often overwinter around Wascana Lake, or move further north for breeding, and move further south for its non-breeding season. Cedar waxwings love fruit and can often survive off only fruit for consecutive months. The best way to see our spring visitors is to go birding throughout Wascana. Whether you're casually walking around the lake or you're coming to the park armed with binoculars, a camera, and a bird book, you will be able to witness the different bird species calling Wascana home. If you're looking for an additional challenge or perhaps an easy guide for birdwatching, be sure to check out our spring birdwatching scavenger hunt and see how many you can spot.
All plants and animals must receive energy to survive. Plants receive energy from the sun and by nutrients that it uptakes through its roots. Animals receive energy either by eating plants or by eating other animals. This is how a healthy ecosystem works. An example of a food chain is a plant receiving energy from the sun. A mouse will receive energy by eating the plant. A snake will receive its energy from eating the mouse, and a hawk will come in and eat the snake to gain its energy. A healthy ecosystem occurs when there is enough food for all organisms inside of the ecosystem. The fact of the matter is this is not something that happens very often, as ecosystems are often unbalanced. An example of this is if there are way too many hawks in an ecosystem, the snake population will go down. If the snake population goes down far enough, the hawk population will also start to go down. So this is why it's important to keep a balance in an ecosystem. One example that we tend to see closer to home here at Wascana Park is the relationship between coyotes and rodents. Coyotes prey on rodents such as mice, voles, and rabbits. If we have a higher coyote population in the park, that usually means we'll have a lower rodent population in the park. If coyotes can't get into the city, maybe due to construction on the outskirts, that means we will have a higher rodent population in the park. Another example of an imbalanced ecosystem that occurs here at Wascana Park is between dragonflies and drought. The dragonfly life cycle starts when dragonflies lay eggs in the water that stay as larvae in the water for 2 to 4 years before attaching to a reed and shedding its exoskeleton to become a dragonfly. Since the dragonfly larva is usually in low water marshy areas, if a drought occurs, this marshy area might dry up, killing the larvae. One of the best ways to see a thriving ecosystem at Wascana Park is by visiting the Habitat Conservation Area. This area provides natural habitat for various mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, fish, insects, and plants. One of the most exciting species that can be found at the Habitat Conservation Area is the western painted turtle. When walking along the path, you will see a dugout. In the summer, you are almost guaranteed to see western painted turtles soaking up the sun on the west side of the dugout. Since western painted turtles are exotherms, they rely on the sun to regulate their body temperature. Make sure you don't get too close to the turtles or they will flee into the water. To get the full experience of the Habitat Conservation Area, pick a nice warm day in the summer to come watch the ecosystem flourish. Don't forget to bring binoculars. A fun way to learn more about how a food chain works is by making your own food chain. You can make your own predator and prey relationships. For more information on this activity, visit the activity guide under the video. That about wraps up our interactive tour of the Habitat Conservation Area. See if you can come check out the Habitat Conservation Area or somewhere else in the park and see if you can see the changes of spring. Be sure to check out our other interactive tours for your next trip to Wascana Park. Thank you.